I thought it was just a harmless coincidence, until all three of my neighbors stepped into the hallway wearing the same robe. What started as a laugh turned into the kind of night that changes how you see people, and how you see yourself. I still remember the exact moment it started. I was unlocking my apartment door, keys jingling in my hand, when I heard the sound of laughter echoing down the hallway. It wasn't just one voice, it was three. Soft, warm, mature laughter that carried a kind of ease I could only hope to grow into someday. When I turned my head, that's when I saw them. My three neighbors, each in their early 40s, each striking in her own way, stepping out of their apartments almost at the same time. And here's the part that stopped me in my tracks. Every single one of them was wearing the same robe. At first, I actually laughed under my breath. I thought maybe it was some kind of practical joke, like I had just walked into the middle of a skit I wasn't supposed to see. But the way they carried themselves, the calm confidence, the way their eyes flickered toward me without a trace of embarrassment, it didn't feel like a joke at all. If anything, it felt like I was the one out of place. The robes weren't flashy. They weren't silly or cartoonish. They were simple, elegant. The kind of soft, silken fabric that drapes just right, catching the hallway light in muted shades of cream and gray. And when the three of them stood there together, it almost looked coordinated. Like they were part of something I didn't understand yet. I remember my pulse quickening for no reason. It was ridiculous. I mean, they were just robes. Just neighbors. But something about the way they moved, side by side, filled the air with a strange electricity. One of them tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, glancing my way with the faintest smile. Another adjusted her sleeve, the fabric whispering as it brushed against her wrist. Little details, but somehow magnified in the quiet of that moment. I leaned against my doorframe, pretending to fumble with my keys, trying not to look too obvious. My mind was racing. Is this some kind of tradition? Did I miss a memo? Or is it a game? The faint scent of their perfumes drifted across the hallway, subtle but layered, floral, musky, and clean. 3 different women, 3 different lives, and yet somehow, here they were, woven together in this moment, leaving me caught between amusement and intrigue. I couldn't help but smile to myself. Whatever this is, I thought, I want to understand it. What I didn't know then, standing there under the dim light of that hallway, was that this small, almost comical detail, the robes, would be the doorway into something much deeper. What started as a strange coincidence, a game in my mind, was about to unravel into something that would change how I saw them, and how I saw myself. I don't know if it was the robes or the timing, but standing there in that hallway, I felt like the air was too heavy for small talk. Luckily, one of them, Marissa, the one with the auburn hair and the kind of smile that always seemed half amused, broke the silence. "Well," she said, raising her eyebrow, "you caught us. I guess the secret's out." The other two laughed, a soft, shared laughter that felt practiced, like they'd been holding on to the joke for weeks. I let out a nervous chuckle, rubbing the back of my neck. "Secret?" I asked, trying to play along. "You mean the Robe Society?" They laughed again, and this time the sound loosened something in me. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't even defensive. It was welcoming. "Come on." Another one, Elena, dark-haired, poised in a way that made everything she said sound important, gestured toward their shared lounge just off the hallway. "We were just making tea. Join us before you keep inventing conspiracy theories about us." I should have said no. I had things to do, excuses I could have used. But there was something magnetic about the invitation, about the way they stood there, at ease in their matching robes, as if they knew something I didn't. So I followed. The lounge was warm, softer than my apartment. Lamps cast a golden glow across the space, and the air smelled faintly of chamomile and vanilla. One of them, Sophia, the quietest so far, with a softness in her eyes that made me feel both seen and unsettled, handed me a mug. Her fingers brushed against mine as she passed it over, and the warmth of the porcelain seemed to linger far longer than it should have. "Careful," she said gently. "It's hot." I sat down with them, and at first, it was light-hearted. Jokes about neighbors who barely talk suddenly having a tea party, about me being the odd one out, without a robe. But slowly, the conversation shifted into something else. I started noticing how they filled the room, not just physically, but emotionally. The way they asked questions, actually listening to my answers. The way their laughter wasn't rushed, wasn't meant to fill silence, but came naturally, spilling into the quiet spaces between us. I realized then how rarely I'd felt that, being around people who weren't in a hurry to move on to the next thing. I caught myself watching the way Marissa tilted her head back when she laughed, her robe slipping slightly off her shoulder, revealing the delicate curve of her collarbone. I noticed how Elena leaned forward when she spoke, her hands moving gracefully as though her words deserved a frame. And Sophia? Sophia kept glancing at me with small, almost shy smiles, like she was amused by how out of place I felt, but she didn't want me to feel unwelcome. The tea was warm, but what I felt was something else entirely. A quiet pull, like I was being drawn into their orbit. It wasn't just about the robes anymore. It was about them, their presence, their confidence, their ease. And I sat there, sipping slowly, wondering if they had any idea how much space they were already taking up in my thoughts. The laughter carried us for a while. It was easy, natural, the kind of rhythm you fall into without noticing. But like all things, it began to fade, and when it did, something heavier settled in its place. It was Elena who shifted the tone first. She set her cup down on the low table, the soft clink of porcelain drawing our attention. She looked at the other two, then at me, her expression softer now, stripped of the playful edge. "You think this is just a game, don't you?" she asked, not accusingly, but with a kind of curiosity that made me pause. I hesitated, caught off guard. "I mean 3 matching robes?" It felt like one. I gave a half-smile, hoping to ease the seriousness I suddenly felt creeping in. But Marissa shook her head, her auburn hair falling across her cheek as she did. "It's not a game," she said quietly. "It's something we promised each other." The room grew still. Even the air felt different, heavier, as though we'd all agreed to step into a quieter truth. Sophia, who hadn't spoken much, finally lifted her eyes toward me. They were warm, but behind them lingered a softness that carried weight. "We bought them after everything fell apart," she said, her voice low, almost like a confession. "Everything?" I asked carefully. Marissa sighed, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Divorces. Breakups. Years of giving more than we got back. One night, we sat right here, just like this, and decided we weren't going to let those stories define us anymore. So we made a pact. Every Friday, we'd wear these robes. It was silly at first, but it was ours. A way of reminding ourselves we're not alone in it." Her words landed heavier than I expected. I glanced at Elena and noticed the way she pressed her lips together, as though holding back the tremor in her voice. She reached across the table and rested her hand on Sophia's, a silent gesture that spoke volumes. I didn't know what to say. The image I had, 3 confident women playing some inside joke, was replaced with something deeper, something infinitely more human. They weren't flaunting robes for the sake of appearances. They were carrying symbols of survival, of resilience, of quiet solidarity. And I felt my chest tighten, not out of pity, but out of admiration. For a long moment, I just listened. The ticking of a clock somewhere in the corner filled the space between their words. The robe that once seemed like a funny coincidence now looked almost sacred. And sitting there with them, I couldn't help but feel like I was being let into a circle I didn't deserve, a story I hadn't earned the right to hear. But the truth was, I wanted to. I wanted to understand them, to know more than just the outlines of their laughter. I wanted to know the depth that sat behind their eyes when the smiles faded. And that night, for the first time, I began to. The night kept unfolding, hour by hour, until I forgot what time it was. The mugs had long been drained, replaced by glasses of water, but no one seemed eager to end the conversation. The room was dim now, lit only by the golden lamp in the corner, shadows softening everything into warmth. I was sitting at the edge of the couch, shoulders a little tense, but they, Marissa, Elena, and Sophia, seemed to notice. Or maybe they always noticed. Marissa shifted closer first, her robe brushing lightly against my arm as she leaned in to emphasize a story she was telling. Her laugh rang out, full and unguarded, and before I realized it, her hand fell gently against my knee. Just for a second, but long enough for my pulse to stutter. She didn't seem to notice what it did to me. Or maybe she did, and that was part of the unspoken rhythm we'd stepped into. Across from us, Elena sat with her legs tucked beneath her posture impossibly elegant even in something as simple as a robe. When she spoke, her eyes stayed on me, unwavering, as though she wanted to make sure every word landed. And when she paused, I noticed her fingers brushing idly along the edge of her sleeve, the subtle rustle of fabric filling the silence. Sophia was quieter, but she had a way of drawing me in without needing to say much. At one point, she leaned forward to pour more water into my glass, her hand steady, her face so close I caught the faint scent of her shampoo, fresh, almost floral. When she passed the glass to me, her fingers lingered just a little too long against mine, deliberate or not, I couldn't tell. It was strange. Nothing about this was overt, nothing said outright. Yet every movement carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The Robe Society, as I had teased earlier, wasn't just a symbol anymore. It felt like an invitation. To closeness. To trust. To something I wasn't sure I was ready to name. As the conversation drifted from stories of past heartbreaks to lighter topics, favorite movies, guilty pleasures, what we'd cook if money and time were no issue, I found myself watching the way their eyes softened when they looked at me. Not in pity, not even in curiosity, but in a kind of quiet acknowledgement. As if they saw me, not just the young neighbor fumbling for words, but someone they wanted to let in. At one point, Marissa leaned back against the couch with a sigh, her head tilting just slightly toward my shoulder. It wasn't a full gesture, not even a touch, but the closeness was enough to make my breath catch. I didn't move away. The room felt suspended in that moment. No declarations, no sudden changes. Just a gentle weaving together of spaces, of bodies leaning closer, of silences that no longer felt empty. It wasn't a game anymore. It was something else, something I didn't yet know how to name. But I could feel it pressing at the edges of the night, asking to be acknowledged. And I knew, whether or not I said a word, the threshold had already been crossed. At some point I excused myself. I told them I needed a breath of air, but the truth was, I needed space to think. I stepped out into the hallway, leaning against the cool wall. My head felt light, caught between the warmth of their presence and the heaviness of my own thoughts. The robe packed, the laughter, the way their touches lingered, it all felt like it meant something. But what? That's when the doubt started to creep in. They're older. They've lived lives I can't even begin to imagine. Divorces, heartbreaks, starting over. What do I have compared to that? To them, am I just some kid next door, fumbling over every glance, reading into every small touch like it's more than it is? I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. Part of me wanted to walk back to my apartment, close the door, and pretend none of this had ever happened. It would have been easier. Cleaner. But another part of me, the part that still felt the warmth of Marissa's hand on my knee, the weight of Elena's eyes when she spoke, the softness in Sophia's smile, couldn't let go that easily. When I finally walked back inside, the room quieted. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me, not with impatience, but with something softer. Concern. Curiosity. Sophia was the one who spoke first. "You okay?" Her voice was careful, like she didn't want to push too hard. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Just needed a moment." Elena tilted her head, studying me the way she always did, like she could see past the words I offered. "What's really on your mind?" And in that instant, I realized I had a choice. I could laugh it off, make another joke, or I could be honest. My chest tightened as I chose the latter. I don't know where I fit in this," I admitted. "You've all lived so much more than I have." Sometimes I feel like I'm just too young to matter to women like you." The words hung in the air, heavier than I intended. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Marissa leaned forward, her expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "Age isn't the measure of what matters," she said. "Not to us." Sophia reached out, her hand finding mine on the table. Her touch was warm, steady, not tentative this time. "We don't need someone who's been through exactly what we have. We just need someone who's real." Elena's gaze softened, the intensity giving way to something gentler. "And you are. You've been nothing but present, nothing but honest tonight. That means more than years ever could." Their words sank into me, grounding me. The doubts didn't vanish completely, but they loosened their grip. I realized then that maybe this wasn't about matching their histories. Maybe it was about meeting them where they were, here, in this moment, robes and laughter and all, and letting whatever this was take its natural course. And for the first time that night, I felt like I wasn't just a neighbor on the outside looking in. I felt like I belonged in that room. After that moment of honesty, something shifted between us. The air in the room no longer felt heavy with doubt, it felt lighter, warmer, as though speaking the truth had opened a door we'd all been tiptoeing around. The conversation picked up again, but now there was a softness to it. We laughed about small things, awkward neighbors in the building, the stubborn elevator that groaned like it was centuries old. Every laugh felt easier, every pause felt comfortable. But beneath it all, there was something different. A current running quietly under the surface. Marissa was the first to show it. She'd stretched out across the couch, her robe shifting as she leaned back, her hair falling loosely over her shoulder. Without hesitation, she let her head rest gently against me. At first, just for comfort, like leaning into a cushion. But then I felt the weight of it, deliberate and steady. Her cheek brushed my shoulder, and my breath caught, not because it startled me, but because it felt natural. Like it was meant to be there. I didn't move. I couldn't. On the other side of the room, Elena shifted too. She tucked her feet beneath her, sliding closer until her knee brushed lightly against mine. She didn't say anything, but the contact was clear, purposeful. When I glanced at her, she held my gaze for just a second too long before giving me the smallest smile, as if to say, "You don't have to question this anymore." And then there was Sophia. She hadn't leaned in, hadn't made some bold gesture. Instead, she simply reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. No words, no explanation, just that quiet weight, grounding and steady. Her touch was feather-light at first, but as I curled my fingers to meet hers, she let them settle there fully, her thumb brushing ever so slightly across the back of my hand. It was nothing grand. But it was everything. The robes, which hours ago had seemed strange, even funny, now felt like a symbol of something I'd been invited into. Not a secret pact I could never understand, but a shared space of trust, of closeness, of choosing connection over distance. I let my eyes wander for a moment, the soft lamplight spilling over their faces, the shadows dancing along the folds of their robes, the faint glimmer in their eyes when they looked my way. I realized then that the line I'd been afraid of crossing, it wasn't just mine to carry. They were meeting me halfway, maybe even further. No one said it out loud. There was no declaration, no sudden confession. But the unspoken truth was there, sitting with us like a fourth presence in the room. I wasn't just the young neighbor anymore. I wasn't an outsider, fumbling to understand their bond. I was part of it now. And for the first time all night, I didn't feel nervous. I just felt home. Time has a way of slipping through your fingers when you don't want it to end. One moment, the room was alive with laughter and quiet touches, and the next, I noticed the clock's hands creeping past midnight. The world outside was asleep, but in that lounge, it felt like we were caught in a pocket of time that belonged only to us. Eventually, Elena stretched with a soft sigh, her robe falling gracefully around her as she stood. "We should probably call it a night," she said, though her voice carried no urgency. Marissa groaned in playful protest, her head still resting lightly against my shoulder. "I could sit here for hours." But even she lifted herself slowly, brushing her hair back, her smile lingering as she looked at me. Sophia, always the quiet one, began gathering the empty mugs from the table. I stood to help her, instinct more than thought. When I took a mug from her hands, our fingers touched again, deliberate this time, either of us pulling away. She gave me a soft smile, one that said more than words could carry. The four of us tidied the space together, not in a rush, not filling the air with unnecessary chatter. It felt almost domestic, almost like a ritual, each of us moving in rhythm with the others, no one left out. When everything was put away, they walked me to the door. All three of them, side by side, robes tied loosely at the waist, faces softened by the lamplight spilling from the lounge. I lingered there, reluctant to break the spell. "Thank you," I said quietly, my voice catching a little. "For tonight." Elena tilted her head, her eyes holding mine. "You don't need to thank us. You belong here as much as we do." Marissa chuckled softly, though her tone was gentle. "Besides, now you're part of the Robe Society. No backing out." We all laughed, but the sound felt different now, warmer, deeper, bound by something more than coincidence. And then came the goodbyes. Sophia stepped closer first, rising on her toes just slightly to brush a kiss against my cheek. Her lips were soft, her breath warm against my skin. Marissa followed, quick but certain, her hand briefly squeezing my arm as she leaned in to do the same. Finally, Elena reached out, adjusting the collar of my jacket with delicate fingers before pressing her lips lightly to my other cheek. Each touch was gentle, safe, but together they carried a weight that left me standing there, breath caught in my chest. When I finally stepped into the hallway, I turned back. They were still there, framed in the doorway, three quiet smiles beneath the golden light. No one rushed to close the door. No one needed to. I realized then it was never about the robes, never about a game. It was about connection, about three women who had built a safe space for themselves and, for reasons I couldn't fully understand, had chosen to let me in. As the door eased shut, their laughter echoed softly behind it. And I knew, without question, that nothing would ever feel quite the same again.